Through dawn's breaking light, the mountain man spotted a black woman hanging from the trading post roof with a sack over her head, her bound hands clawing desperately at the noose around her neck. The frontier had already written her off, another nameless casualty in a land where justice came slow and mercy came slower. Folks would avert their eyes, shake their heads, and forget by supper. She was meant to die here, swallowed by wilderness and silence. But the grizzled loner approaching had buried his own family to frontier cruelty, and something in her fierce struggle stirred memories he'd tried to forget. What he couldn't know was that saving her life would drag him into a web of corruption, reaching the territorial capital, where powerful men killed to protect secrets worth fortunes. Would he cut her down and risk everything, or walk away and let the frontier claim another victim? The morning sun cast long shadows across the abandoned trading post when Silas Boone heard the creaking rope above. He looked up to see boots dangling against weathered wood. A woman hung from the roof beam, a burlap sack covering her head, her hands bound but still fighting against the noose. Silas dropped his pack and scrambled up the side of the building. His knife cut through the rope just as her struggles began to weaken. She collapsed into his arms, gasping for air beneath the rough fabric. He pulled the sack away and stepped back in surprise. The woman before him wore torn clothing, but the fabric was fine quality. Her dark skin showed bruises, yet her eyes held an intelligence that caught him off guard. When she spoke, her voice carried refinement he had never heard from anyone on the frontier. "Thank you, sir. I am in your debt." Silas studied her carefully. Something about this situation felt wrong. Women like her did not travel alone in this territory. They certainly did not end up at abandoned trading posts wearing expensive Eastern clothing. What happened here? She straightened her torn dress and looked around the empty building. "I cannot say, not yet. Someone tried to kill you." "Yes. Why? That is complicated." Silas walked through the trading post, examining the scattered evidence. Expensive leather luggage lay torn open near the door. Papers were scattered across the floor, some partially burned in the cold fireplace. A marshal's badge sat deliberately placed on the counter, its metal surface gleaming in the morning light. He picked up one of the unburned documents. Legal language filled the page, but the words made little sense to him. Land deeds, property transfers, official seals. The paper quality was better than anything produced in the territory. "These yours?" The woman hesitated before nodding. "Some of them. You can read this." "Yes." Silas had encountered runaway slaves before, but none who could read legal documents, none who spoke like Eastern schoolteachers, none who traveled with luggage that cost more than most settlers earned in a year. "Where you from?" "Back east." "Doing what out here?" "I have business in Denver City." "What kind of business?" She looked at the badge on the counter. "The kind that gets people killed." Silas understood the weight of those words. He had seen enough frontier justice to recognize when someone powerful wanted someone else silenced. The badge belonged to Marshal Jedediah Crate, a man known for solving problems for wealthy landowners, problems that usually involved people disappearing. "You running from the law?" "I am running toward it." Her answer puzzled him. Most people in her situation would be running away from anything connected to territorial authority. Crate's reputation extended across 3 counties, and none of it was good. "That makes no sense." "It will." Silas packed what remained of her belongings into the damaged luggage. The woman moved with purpose despite her injuries, gathering specific papers from the floor. She could clearly distinguish between different documents, sorting them quickly. "How long you been out here?" 3 days. "Alone?" "I had a guide. He is dead." The simple statement carried no emotion, but Silas recognized the weight behind it. Losing a guide in this territory usually meant more than bad luck. Someone had sent a message. "Where exactly you headed in Denver?" "The territorial courthouse." Silas stopped packing. The courthouse meant lawyers, judges, and the kind of official business that required education and money. This woman appeared to have both, which made her presence on the frontier even more mysterious. "You got family there?" "No. Business partners." "Not exactly." Then why risk your life getting there? She looked directly at him for the first time since he had cut her down. Because hundreds of families are losing everything they own, and someone needs to stop it. The conviction in her voice surprised him. Silas had heard plenty of people complain about territorial corruption, but most accepted it as the cost of frontier life. This woman spoke like someone with a plan to fight back. What makes you think you can help them? I have skills. What kind of skills? The kind that threaten the wrong people. Silas finished packing her belongings and shouldered his rifle. The morning was advancing, and staying near the trading post felt increasingly dangerous. If Crate had left his badge as a warning, he would likely return to confirm his message had been received. We need to move. Where? Away from here. She followed him toward the tree line without argument. Her eastern boots were not designed for rough terrain, but she kept pace without complaint. Every few minutes she glanced back at the trading post as if memorizing details. You planning to come back? Eventually. That would be suicide. Perhaps. Her calm acceptance of danger puzzled him. Most people who survived hanging attempts would be focused on getting as far away as possible. This woman seemed to be planning her next move in what appeared to be a larger strategy. As they reached the cover of pine trees, Silas heard distant hoofbeats approaching the trading post. Multiple riders, moving with purpose. He pulled the woman behind a large boulder and motioned for silence. Through the trees, they watched 5 men on horseback circle the abandoned building. One wore a marshal's badge identical to the one they had left behind. Marshal Crate had returned to finish his work. The woman gripped Silas's arm tightly as they watched the men search the area. Her refined composure cracked slightly, revealing the fear she had been hiding. Whatever business brought her to the frontier had put her in direct conflict with territorial authority. Crate emerged from the trading post holding the badge from the counter. He mounted his horse and looked directly toward their hiding place. Even from a distance, his expression conveyed cold determination. Marshal Crate spurred his horse toward the forest, his men spreading out in a search pattern. Silas grabbed the woman's hand and pulled her deeper into the pine cover. They moved quickly through the undergrowth, her eastern boots struggling on the uneven ground. Behind them, voices carried through the trees. Crate was coordinating his men, dividing the search area into sections. These were not random pursuers. They moved with military precision, cutting off escape routes systematically. Why would a marshal go to such lengths for one person? Silas whispered. The woman stumbled on a route but kept moving. Because I know something he cannot allow me to share. What? Not here. They climbed higher into the mountains, using game trails to mask their movement. The woman's breathing grew labored, but she pushed forward without complaint. Her determination impressed Silas. Most eastern city dwellers would have collapsed by now. Hours passed before they reached a cave system Silas knew from his trapping roots. The entrance was hidden behind fallen rocks, invisible unless someone knew exactly where to look. Inside, the cavern opened into a natural shelter large enough for a small camp. We can rest here. The woman collapsed against the cave wall, exhaustion finally showing. Her fine dress was torn beyond repair, her hands scratched from climbing over rocks. But her eyes remained alert, calculating their next moves. Silas built a small fire using dry wood that would produce minimal smoke. The flame cast dancing shadows on the cave walls, creating an intimate space that encouraged conversation. The woman watched him work with obvious appreciation for his wilderness skills. You saved my life. Not the first time I have cut someone down, but you stayed to help. Silas poked at the fire with a stick. My wife and daughter were killed by men like Crate. I know what it means to be hunted. The woman studied his weathered face in the firelight. I am sorry for your loss. Long time ago, the pain does not fade. No, she reached into her torn dress and winced. Something was hidden beneath the fabric, sewn into the lining. Her fingers worked carefully, trying not to damage whatever she was retrieving. I need to show you something. What? The reason they want me dead. She pulled out folded papers protected by oiled cloth. The documents were official, bearing territorial seals and legal stamps. Even in the dim firelight, Silas could see they were important government papers. Land patents, she said, unfolding the first document, filed legally with the territorial office, then mysteriously canceled days later. Silas moved closer to examine the papers. The legal language was beyond his education, but the pattern was clear. Names, dates, property descriptions, all stamped with official seals. Homesteaders, hundreds of them. They filed claims properly, paid their fees, worked their land for years. Then suddenly their patents were declared invalid. On what grounds? Clerical errors, missing signatures, technical violations that never existed in the original filings. She spread out more documents. Each told the same story. Families losing everything they had built because of mysterious legal problems that appeared years after their claims were approved. Someone is stealing these claims. Yes. Who? She pulled out a different document, this one bearing Judge Harrison Blackwood's signature. The territorial judge. He declares the original patents invalid, then immediately grants the same land to railroad companies and Eastern investors. Silas understood land disputes, but the scale of this operation surprised him. How many families? Over 300 so far, more every month. How do you know all this? The woman folded the papers carefully before answering. Because I have spent 2 years investigating the pattern. Why would you care about frontier land disputes? Because I represent the Eastern investors who are being cheated alongside the homesteaders. Silas frowned. I thought you said the Eastern investors were getting the land. Different investors. The legitimate ones hired me to investigate why their money keeps disappearing into fraudulent territorial deals. She pulled out a leather portfolio from deeper in her dress lining. Inside were credentials, certificates, and official correspondence, all bearing the same name, Eliza Freeman, attorney at law. Silas stared at the documents. You are a lawyer. Yes. How is that possible? Eliza straightened despite her exhaustion. I studied law in Philadelphia, passed the bar examination under supervision of progressive lawyers who believe in justice regardless of background. They let you practice. In the East, with certain restrictions. But territorial law is different, more flexible about who can represent clients in legal matters. Silas had never encountered a female lawyer, let alone a black one. The frontier produced unusual people, but Eliza represented something entirely new in his experience. You came out here to practice law. I came to investigate fraud. The legal practice was my cover story. She pulled out more papers, these showing systematic corruption. Forged signatures on land patents, backdated legal filings, and financial records proving money was being diverted from legitimate investment funds. Judge Blackwood is running a massive fraud operation. He steals homestead claims and sells them to fake Eastern investors, keeping the money for himself. How much money? Hundreds of thousands of dollars. Maybe more. The sum was staggering. Enough to buy judges, marshals, and anyone else needed to maintain the fraud. Enough to justify killing anyone who threatened to expose it. Why did they not just kill you quietly? They tried. The hanging was supposed to look like frontier justice, a troublemaker who got what she deserved. But I found you. Yes. Silas looked at the legal documents spread across the cave floor. This evidence could destroy them, if it reaches the right authorities. What authorities? Crate works for the territorial government. Eliza smiled for the first time since he had rescued her. Federal authorities. This fraud involves interstate commerce and mail fraud. That makes it a federal crime. You have federal contacts. I have friends in Washington who arranged my credentials. They are waiting for my report. The firelight flickered across her determined face. Silas realized he was looking at someone who had planned this mission carefully, someone with resources and connections he had never imagined. We need to get you to Denver City. Yes, Crate will be watching every road. Then we find another way. They traveled by night, following deer paths through the mountains. Eliza's Eastern boots had given her blisters, but she never complained. Her legal mind worked constantly, analyzing their situation and planning 3 moves ahead. "There is a homesteader settlement 2 valleys over," Silas said during their second dawn. "The Murphy family. They lost their land claim last month to mysterious legal problems. Judge said their original filing was incomplete. Gave their farm to a railroad company the same day." Eliza's eyes sharpened. "That fits the pattern. I need to interview them." They reached the Murphy homestead by evening. The family was packing their belongings into a wagon, preparing to abandon the farm they had worked for 5 years. 3 children helped their parents load furniture, while their grandmother sat watching with defeated eyes. Thomas Murphy looked up as Silas approached. "Boone, heard you were back in these parts. Sorry about your troubles, Tom. Nothing to be done. Judge's word is final." Eliza stepped forward, her torn dress making her look like another displaced person. "May I ask what happened exactly?" Murphy studied her carefully. "Who is asking?" "Someone who might be able to help." "Lady, nobody can help. We got papers saying our claim was never properly filed. 5 years of work, and they say we were squatters the whole time." Eliza examined the legal documents Murphy produced. Her trained eye spotted the inconsistencies immediately. Signatures that did not match the original filing dates. Stamps that used ink formulations not available when the documents were supposedly created. "These are forgeries." "What do you mean?" "Someone altered your original documents. Look at this signature. The ink is different from the rest of the page." Murphy leaned closer. "How do you know about such things?" "I have experience with legal documents." Eliza spent an hour documenting the fraud, taking detailed notes about dates, signatures, and procedural violations. The Murphy case followed the exact same pattern as the documents hidden in her dress. "What good does knowing this do us?" Murphy asked. "Judge already ruled. Federal law supersedes territorial decisions when fraud is involved. Federal law does not reach out here. It will when I present evidence to the proper authorities." Murphy looked at this strange woman with skepticism and growing hope. "You saying we might get our land back?" "I am saying you were robbed and thieves can be prosecuted." That night, word spread through the settlement. Other displaced families appeared at the Murphy homestead, each carrying legal documents that told identical stories. Eliza interviewed them systematically, building a comprehensive case file. The Werner family had lost their claim to a clerical error that mysteriously appeared 2 years after their patent was approved. The Rodriguez family faced eviction because their boundary markers had supposedly been placed incorrectly, despite territorial surveyors confirming the boundaries were accurate. Every story followed the same pattern. Legitimate claims declared invalid through technical violations, then immediately transferred to Eastern investment companies that existed only on paper. "How many families total?" Eliza asked. "In this valley alone, maybe 20, Murphy replied. "But we heard the same thing is happening all over the territory." Eliza's legal mind calculated the scope. If every valley was experiencing similar fraud, the operation involved thousands of acres and hundreds of thousands of dollars. Judge Blackwood was running the largest land fraud scheme in territorial history. "We need to get this information to Denver City," she told Silas. "Crate has men watching every road into town. Then we go around them." The next morning brought unexpected visitors. Marshal Crate and 4 deputies rode into the settlement, supposedly investigating reports of claim jumpers in the area. But his eyes scanned the displaced families with particular interest. "Any of you folks seen strangers passing through recently?" Crate asked. "Troublemakers stirring up problems about land claims." The homesteaders exchanged glances but remained silent. These were people who had learned not to trust territorial authority. "I heard there was a woman traveling through, someone spreading lies about legal processes." Murphy stepped forward. "Marshal, only strangers we seen are folks like us, losing their homes to legal problems. Legal problems are handled by proper courts. Anyone trying to interfere with territorial justice is breaking the law." Crate's gaze lingered on the packed wagons and displaced families. His message was clear: accept the court decisions, or face additional consequences. After the deputies left, Eliza emerged from the root cellar where she had hidden during the search. "He knows I am in the area." "How?" "Someone told him. Either that or he is checking every settlement systematically. We need to move tonight." But Eliza had made a decision during her hours in hiding. "No, we need to go to Denver City directly. That is suicide. Hiding in mountains will not stop Blackwood from destroying evidence. Every day we delay, more families lose their homes and more documents disappear." Silas understood her reasoning but knew the dangers. "Crate will have the main roads covered. Then we use the railroad." "What railroad?" "The same one that is receiving stolen land. Their tracks run directly to Denver City." It was a bold plan. Hide among the cars carrying freight from the railroad companies that were benefiting from the fraud. Use their own transportation network against them. Railroad bulls shoot trespassers. Railroad bulls do not shoot well-dressed passengers. Eliza had been thinking beyond mere survival. Hidden in her remaining luggage were clean clothes and proper traveling papers. With some effort, she could still pass as a legitimate Eastern traveler. "What about me?" "You are my guide. Frontier scouts escort Eastern clients all the time." The plan required split timing and considerable risk. They would need to reach the railroad junction without being spotted by Crate's patrols. Then board a freight train heading east without arousing suspicion from railroad security. "When does the next train run?" "Tomorrow evening." "Then we leave at dawn." As they prepared for the most dangerous part of their journey, Eliza sorted through her evidence one final time. The documents told a clear story of systematic fraud, but only if they reached authorities who would act on federal charges. "What happens if we do not make it?" "Then hundreds of families lose everything and the thieves win." "And if we do make it?" "Then we destroy them." They reached the railroad junction at sunset, hiding in a grove of cottonwoods while freight cars loaded timber and cattle. Eliza had changed into her cleanest remaining dress, transforming from a frontier refugee into something resembling an Eastern traveler. The illusion was not perfect, but it might survive casual inspection. "That one," Silas pointed to a boxcar marked with Denver City routing, "carries finished lumber, should have space." They waited until the railroad workers finished loading and moved to the next car. Silas forced open the sliding door just wide enough for them to slip inside. The car smelled of pine and sawdust, stacked lumber leaving a narrow corridor where they could hide. The train whistle echoed across the valley as the locomotive began pulling its load toward the territorial capital. Eliza settled among the lumber stacks, finally allowing exhaustion to show on her face. The constant running had worn her down, but her legal mind remained sharp. "How long to Denver City?" 6 hours if we do not stop for more freight." "What happens when we arrive?" "We find the federal authorities you mentioned." But Eliza's expression had grown troubled during the journey. "I have been thinking about Crate's behavior at the settlement." "What about it?" He was not searching randomly. He knew exactly which questions to ask. Silas had noticed the same thing. Someone told him where to look, or someone is directing his search. The train rounded a mountain curve, and through the boxcar slats they could see Denver City sprawling in the valley below. Gas lamps flickered along the main streets, and the territorial courthouse dominated the town center with its imposing stone facade. "Tomorrow, I present evidence to the federal territorial representative." "You sure he can be trusted?" "He was appointed by Washington. He should be independent of local corruption." But even as she spoke, Eliza felt doubts creeping in. The fraud operation was too sophisticated, too well coordinated to survive without protection at multiple levels of government. The train pulled into Denver City Rail Yard just after midnight. They waited until the yard workers finished unloading before slipping out of the boxcar. The city was quieter than Eliza had expected. Most businesses closed and streets empty, except for occasional night patrols. "We need lodging. Hotel will ask questions." "I still have money." They found rooms at a modest boarding house near the courthouse. The proprietor barely glanced at them, accepting Eliza's payment without curiosity. In frontier towns, travelers with ready money were welcome regardless of their appearance. Eliza spent the night organizing her evidence, preparing legal arguments for the morning presentation. The documents told a compelling story, but she knew federal representatives dealt with territorial complaints constantly. She needed irrefutable proof and a clear prosecution strategy. Dawn brought unwelcome news. Sela's returned from scouting the courthouse with troubling information. Federal representative left town yesterday. Emergency business in Washington. How convenient. Gets worse. Judge Blackwood is hearing cases all week. His men are everywhere. Eliza looked out the boarding house window at the courthouse steps. Even from a distance, she could see armed deputies stationed at every entrance. Getting inside would be difficult. Getting out might be impossible. There has to be another way. Maybe we wait for the federal man to return. How long? Nobody knows. While they debated options, a knock came at Eliza's door. She opened it to find Marshal Crate standing in the hallway, alone and apparently unarmed. His presence sent ice through her veins, but his expression was not what she expected. "Miss Freeman, we need to talk. I have nothing to say to you. You will want to hear this." Crate entered the room without invitation, nodding to Silas with something resembling respect. His demeanor was completely different from the threatening figure they had been fleeing. "You two have been causing considerable trouble. We have been seeking justice." "So have I." Crate reached into his coat slowly, producing a leather wallet. Inside was a federal marshal's badge, genuine and recently issued. "I work for the Justice Department. Have been investigating territorial corruption for 8 months." Eliza stared at the badge, her legal mind processing the implications. "You are undercover. Judge Blackwood thinks I work for him, takes orders from him, protects his operation. The hanging attempt had to look real. Blackwood ordered it, watched from a distance. If I had refused, he would have known I was compromised." Silas stepped forward aggressively. "You nearly killed her. I left the rope loose, timed my arrival to your schedule, made sure you would find her." Eliza examined Crate's federal credentials. They appeared genuine, issued by the Justice Department's Territorial Investigation Division. The dates matched his story about an 8-month undercover assignment. "Why should we trust you?" "Because I need what you have and you need what I know." "What do you mean?" Crate produced his own set of documents. Financial records, correspondence between Blackwood and Eastern contacts, shipping manifests for fake investment companies. "I have been gathering evidence from inside the operation, but I cannot testify as an undercover federal agent without compromising ongoing investigations." "What ongoing investigations?" "This fraud extends beyond Colorado territory. Blackwood is part of a network operating in 6 territories. We need evidence that can be presented by civilian witnesses." Eliza understood immediately. "You need my legal testimony and evidence to prosecute the local operation while maintaining your cover for the broader investigation." "Exactly. But how do we present evidence when Blackwood controls the courthouse?" Crate smiled grimly. "We make him preside over his own prosecution." "How?" "There is a routine homestead dispute scheduled for tomorrow. Simple case about boundary markers. Blackwood thinks it is harmless. You want to substitute our evidence. I want you to represent the homesteader. Use the case to introduce evidence of systematic fraud. Make it part of the official court record where federal authorities can access it." The plan was audacious. Turn a routine legal proceeding into a trap for the corrupt judge. But it required Eliza to reveal her identity and legal credentials in open court. "Blackwood will recognize me. Not if you present as the homesteader's legal representative. Just another frontier lawyer helping with a simple dispute. What happens when he realizes what is happening? He will try to stop the proceedings. That is when I arrest him for obstruction of justice and federal fraud charges." Eliza looked at the evidence spread across her bed, then at the federal badge in Crate's hand. Everything depended on a perfect performance in hostile territory. "When do we start?" "Court convenes at 9 tomorrow morning. Then we have tonight to prepare. Dawn broke over Denver City as Eliza prepared for the most important performance of her life. She had spent the night organizing evidence into a logical presentation, disguising federal fraud charges as routine homestead documentation. Every document had to appear relevant to a simple boundary dispute while building an ironclad case against Judge Blackwood. Crate had arranged for the Murphy family to travel to Denver City as the official plaintiffs. Their boundary dispute was real, making the case appear legitimate. What Blackwood would not realize was that their case connected to hundreds of others through systematic fraud. "Remember, you are just helping with paperwork," Crate instructed. "Let Murphy do most of the talking initially." Eliza nodded, adjusting her appearance to look like a frontier legal assistant rather than a trained attorney. The performance required her to reveal her capabilities gradually, building to the moment when her true credentials would matter most. The courthouse buzzed with morning activity as territorial officials conducted routine business. Clerks filed papers, lawyers consulted with clients, and citizens waited for hearings on various disputes. Nothing suggested the trap being set in courtroom 3. Judge Blackwood entered precisely at 9, his imposing figure commanding immediate respect. He was younger than Eliza had expected, perhaps 50, with intelligent eyes that missed nothing. This was not a simple frontier judge, but a sophisticated criminal running a complex operation. "Murphy versus Colorado Railroad Company," the clerk announced. Thomas Murphy approached the plaintiff's table with obvious nervousness. Beside him, Eliza carried a leather satchel containing what appeared to be supporting documents for a boundary dispute. In reality, the satchel held evidence of the largest fraud in territorial history. "Your Honor, Thomas Murphy seeks clarification of boundary markers on his homestead claim," Eliza began, her voice carefully modulated to sound deferential. Blackwood glanced at her with mild interest. "Are you representing Mr. Murphy?" "I am assisting with documentation, Your Honor." "What documentation?" "Original land patents, survey records, and correspondence with territorial offices." Perfectly routine requests that revealed nothing of the trap being set. Blackwood nodded approvingly and gestured for the proceedings to continue. Eliza presented the first documents, Murphy's original land patent and survey records. Everything appeared standard until she began comparing signatures on different pages. "Your Honor, we notice some inconsistencies in the official records." "What kind of inconsistencies?" "The signature on the original patent differs from the signature on the amendment filed 2 years later." She passed the documents to Blackwood for examination. His expression remained neutral, but his eyes sharpened as he recognized potential problems with his operation's documentation. "Clerical differences are common in territorial offices." "Yes, Your Honor. However, we have similar inconsistencies in related cases." "Related cases?" Other homesteaders in the same valley reported identical problems with their documentation. Eliza produced more files, each containing evidence from the families they had interviewed. Presented individually, each case appeared to be routine clerical errors. Presented together, they revealed a clear pattern of fraud. "How many cases?" 17 in Murphy's Valley alone, Your Honor." Blackwood's composure began showing cracks. 17 cases meant 17 families with evidence of document tampering. More importantly, it meant someone had been systematically investigating his operation. Who compiled this information? The homesteaders themselves, Your Honor. They began comparing experiences and discovered similarities. Eliza was now in dangerous territory. Each answer moved them closer to exposing the investigation, but also closer to presenting evidence that could destroy Blackwood's operation. What similarities? Identical clerical errors appearing years after original patents were approved. Survey problems that mysteriously developed after land had been farmed successfully. Technical violations that were never mentioned during original processing. The courtroom had grown quiet. Other lawyers and court officials were listening with increasing interest. What had begun as a routine boundary dispute was revealing systematic problems with territorial land management. Blackwood realized the proceeding was spiraling beyond his control. These matters should be addressed individually, not as a group complaint. With respect, Your Honor, the pattern suggests a systemic issue that affects proper resolution of individual cases. Eliza was now speaking with increasing authority, her legal training becoming evident in her arguments. She was still playing the role of assistant, but her capabilities were clearly beyond what that role suggested. What systemic issue? Document tampering designed to invalidate legitimate homestead claims. The accusation hung in the courtroom air like smoke. Blackwood's face flushed with anger, but he maintained judicial composure. Losing control now would only validate the accusations being made. That is a serious charge. Yes, Your Honor, which is why we have prepared comprehensive documentation. Eliza opened her satchel and began removing the evidence she had been collecting for months. Financial records, correspondence, shipping manifests, and testimony from dozens of displaced families. Your Honor, we have evidence that over 300 homestead claims have been systematically invalidated through document tampering, then immediately transferred to fraudulent investment companies. The courtroom erupted in whispers. Court officials leaned forward to examine the documents being presented. This was no longer a simple boundary dispute, but a major fraud investigation unfolding in open court. Where did you obtain these documents? Through legal investigation authorized by federal authorities. Blackwood's composure finally cracked. What federal authorities? The Justice Department's Territorial Investigation Division. Eliza reached into her satchel and produced her attorney credentials, federal authorization letters, and correspondence from Washington. The careful disguise fell away as she revealed her true identity and mission. I am Eliza Freeman, attorney at law, authorized by federal authorities to investigate systematic land fraud in Colorado territory. The courtroom fell silent. Judge Blackwood stared at the credentials with growing alarm as he realized the scope of the trap closing around him. This court does not recognize unauthorized legal representation. With respect, Your Honor, my credentials are properly authorized by federal law, which supersedes territorial regulations. Crate stepped forward from his position near the courtroom door. Your Honor, I have federal warrants for your arrest on charges of mail fraud, conspiracy, and theft of federal lands. The trap had closed perfectly. Blackwood was caught between federal charges presented by a legitimate attorney and arrest by a federal marshal. His corruption network was exposed in official court records that could not be suppressed or destroyed. Judge Blackwood's hand moved toward his desk drawer, but Crate was already there, placing federal handcuffs on the corrupt judge's wrists. The courtroom watched in stunned silence as territorial authority crumbled before their eyes. Harrison Blackwood, you are under arrest for federal mail fraud, conspiracy to defraud the United States government, and theft of federal lands. Blackwood's deputies started forward, hands reaching for their weapons. Crate held up his federal badge where everyone could see it clearly. Any interference with a federal arrest is a felony punishable by 10 years in prison. The deputies froze. Federal authority trumped territorial law, and everyone in the courtroom understood the implications. The corruption network that had seemed untouchable was collapsing in real time. Eliza continued presenting evidence while Blackwood sat in handcuffs. Each document she read into the court record became part of the official proceedings, protected by federal law and impossible to suppress. The evidence shows systematic fraud affecting 347 homestead claims, with total damages exceeding $400,000. Court officials scrambled to record every word. This was the largest fraud case in territorial history, and the legal precedents being established would reshape frontier law enforcement. What happens to the stolen land? Thomas Murphy asked. Federal law requires restoration of property to rightful owners, Eliza replied. Every fraudulent transfer will be reversed through proper legal channels. The courtroom erupted in cheers from homesteaders who had traveled to witness the proceedings. Families who had lost everything were hearing that justice was not only possible, but guaranteed under federal protection. Silas watched from the back of the courtroom as Eliza commanded respect from judges, lawyers, and territorial officials. The woman he had cut down from a noose was now dictating terms to the most powerful men in Colorado territory. The court recognizes the federal authority presented by Attorney Freeman, the substitute judge announced. All evidence will be forwarded to appropriate federal prosecutors for criminal proceedings. Crate escorted Blackwood from the courtroom while reading additional charges. The corrupt judges' network was being dismantled systematically, with federal warrants issued for co-conspirators across multiple territories. What about the railroad companies that received stolen land? A lawyer called out. They will face civil litigation for knowing participation in fraudulent land transfers, Eliza answered. Federal prosecutors will determine criminal liability based on evidence of intent. The legal machinery was now in motion, with federal authority backing every decision. What had begun as a desperate flight through mountain wilderness was ending with complete victory through legitimate legal channels. 3 weeks later, Eliza stood in the same courthouse, but now as a recognized member of the territorial bar. Her federal credentials had been accepted, and her law practice was growing rapidly with clients seeking representation in federal court. The Murphy family had returned to their homestead with clear title and federal protection. 17 other families in their valley had received similar restoration of their property rights. Across Colorado territory, hundreds of displaced homesteaders were reclaiming their stolen land. How many cases are you handling now? Silas asked. 43 active cases with more arriving every day. Eliza's office occupied the ground floor of a building near the courthouse. Her sign read simply, E. Freeman, Attorney at Law, Federal and Territorial Cases. The description was modest, but her reputation was spreading throughout the frontier. What about the broader investigation? Crate says they have identified similar operations in 5 other territories. This case provided the evidence needed to launch federal prosecutions across the West. Silas had found new purpose as Eliza's investigator and security. His wilderness skills and frontier connections were invaluable for gathering evidence in remote areas where federal marshals could not operate effectively. Any regrets about leaving the mountains? None. Even after everything that happened, Eliza looked through her office window at the courthouse where she had nearly been silenced forever, especially after everything that happened. Her transformation from intended victim to respected attorney represented something larger than personal success. Federal recognition of her credentials was opening doors for other qualified women and minorities who had been excluded from territorial legal practice. What is next? Railroad litigation. The companies that receive stolen land are fighting the federal restoration orders. Can they win? Not with the evidence we have. Eliza's confidence was justified. The documentation she had risked her life to preserve provided ironclad proof of systematic fraud. Federal prosecutors were using her evidence to build cases that would reshape territorial governance. 6 months after the courthouse confrontation, Eliza argued her most important case. The railroad companies were challenging federal authority to reverse territorial land grants, claiming states' rights protected their fraudulent acquisitions. The federal circuit judge listened carefully as Eliza presented her arguments. Her legal reasoning was flawless, her evidence overwhelming, and her presence in federal court established precedents for future civil rights cases. The court finds that federal law supersedes territorial decisions when those decisions violate constitutional protections and federal statutes. Victory was complete. Not only were the stolen lands restored, but the legal precedent established federal authority to protect homesteader rights against corrupt local officials. That evening, Eliza and Silas sat on her office porch, watching the sun set over the mountains where their partnership had begun. The woman who had nearly died hanging from a trading post roof was now one of the most respected attorneys in Colorado territory. Think you will stay in Denver City? For now, there is still work to be done. What kind of work? The kind that ensures what happened to those homesteader families never happens again. Eliza's law practice had become something larger than she had originally planned. Instead of returning east after completing her investigation, she had chosen to remain on the frontier where her skills were most needed. The people who had once dismissed her as expendable now sought her expertise in federal court. Her intelligence and legal training had not only saved hundreds of families from poverty, but established her as a pioneer in frontier justice. And that is all to the story, for now. Please let me know where you are tuning in from. Perhaps we will create a story there. Consider liking this video and subscribing to our channel, and if you enjoy our content, click this video on your screen. I promise you it's worth watching. See you tomorrow.